There is a mitzvah aseh to be happy on the Chag. The Torah tells us, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall be happy. And the Mishnah Berurah is clear. Apparently, all the poskim agree that on the 7 days of Pesach, the 2 days of Shavuos, the 8 days of Sukkot, there is a mitzvah aseh midaraisa to be happy. It applies to men, it applies to women, it applies as much as it can to children, but the point is it is an obligation to be happy. And the manifestation of the mitzvah means to very simply feel a sense of joy, completion, happiness within one's heart. Now, I believe that this mitzvah aseh is very significant because it brings a couple of points to light. Number one, happiness is a choice. You see, if the Torah commands us to do something, obviously it's within our capacity. And the Torah would never command me to do something that I couldn't do. Point being, oftentimes we take this attitude, well, some people are happy, some people aren't, maybe I could be happy or maybe I couldn't, but it's not really something that I can actively control. Certainly, who wouldn't want to be happy? And I think the first lesson we need to focus on is that happiness is a choice. And if the Torah obligates us in this mitzvah, at least at these times during the year, that means I'm capable and able to. And really, it's not just this time of the year, the pivotal point of the Tochacha. The entire future of the Jewish nation swings at one point. Tachas asher lo avarta Hashem Elokecha b'simcha b'tov lev merov kol. Hashem promises us in the warnings the reason why the Jewish nation will be in exile. The reason why it's going to happen is because you didn't serve Hashem b'simcha, with joy in your heart. Apparently, it is A, possible, B, incumbent upon a person, certainly during the Yom Tov, but even during the rest of the year. And I believe this is not just an issue of a single mitzvah. As a matter of fact, I have an interesting observation to share with you. People are always trying to rate how frum another person is, how religious are they. What do you use as a criteria? How long his Shemona Esrei is, how much he learns, maybe does he or she speak Lashon Hara? I have a very simple criteria. One of the simplest way to determine how religious, how frum a person really is how happy they are. Because if a person is really, truly an Eved Hashem, and if a person really has his life in line, there'll be an inner joy, happiness. Don't get me wrong, there are ups and downs in life, and there are bumps in the roads, and etc. But the climate of a person's life will be happy, assuming that he's serving Hashem properly. Nevertheless, let's focus on this exact point. How does one attain happiness? How does one become happy? If the Torah obligates me, and obviously it's possible, what is the method of doing it? Before I begin, though, let me just mention that this entire discussion, the entire mitzvah, and everything we're really dealing with here is assuming that a person is emotionally, psychologically balanced. Meaning to say there are various situations that will impede a person's happiness, they'll prevent a person from being joyful, but not because they're lacking in outlook in life, not because they're lacking in hashkafa, not because they're lacking in religious observance, but if you're very anxious, you're nervous, if you have various psychological things going on, those are things that must be dealt with directly. Really, largely, it's outside the context of religion. It's outside the context of Avodas Hashem, meaning to say, if you have a nail in your foot, don't go learning Shar B'tochen. It's not going to help you to have more faith in Hashem. You got to go to a doctor. If you have diabetes, you have to control your blood level. If there are things going on in your life that are causing particular unrest, whether it be depression, whether it be anxiety, oftentimes it has nothing to do with your outlook, with your hashkafa, with your religion. It has to do with things that either genetic predispositions or situations you've been in. And in that point, being frummer, being more religious, learning a different outlook is going to help marginally, but you have to deal with the problem directly. Let's assume we're dealing with a person who's healthy, emotionally, psychologically, wholesome as a person, and now how does one acquire happiness? So there are 3 layers to this, and let's begin with the most basic. The most basic layer is you have to know why you're here. We've spent a lot of time in this series so far, but this is a very basic ingredient of a successful, happy person. If I know why Hashem created me, if I know why I'm here, if I'm leading a life of meaning and purpose, there'll be an inner joy in my heart. But if I'm leading a life of vanity, of foolishness, of just squandering my time away, anything else will not bring me joy. Why? Because within me there's an inner conflict. Within me there's a voice inside that says, yuck, what are you doing? What are you accomplishing? What were you put on the planet for? For this? To make money, for honor? For what are you doing? And you cannot quell that voice. You can't squash it. You can't drown it out, not with all the money that money can buy, not with all the honor that you could possibly acquire. And no matter how much you're going to say, but look at me, I'm doing so well, come on, I'm famous, I'm rich, I'm beautiful. It's not going to help because there's an inner emptiness, an inner voice within you that says, yuck. So the first thing that you need to do to be happy is you have to be at peace with you. You and you have to be in equanimity, have to be at peace. There has to be a sense of balance, and that requires understanding why you're here, growing, accomplishing, leading your life as your Creator intended you to. And there's some good news and some bad news in this part of it. You see, you'll meet many people in life who seem to be happy. Most, by the way, aren't. But there are occasionally some people who aren't really living a deep, meaningful life, and yet they might be happy. And here's sort of the good news and the bad news. Moshe Rabbeinu had a very different neshama than any other human being ever created. But with that greater neshama came also a greater responsibility to it. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu had the greatest neshama ever given to a human being, and because of that, he had to live up to it. A Jew and a Gentile are different. It could be that if a person has a different sort of neshama, he doesn't need as much. Now, let's not make any mistake. If a Gentile keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach because Hashem commanded him or her to do it, he or she has a portion in world to come. But at the same time, the neshama is different, not as easily accessible to spirituality, not as focused on it. And in that sense, if a person is a goy, it's easier to just go through life, to just go through the motions, and there isn't as much of that gnawing, what am I doing, what am I accomplishing, what am I doing for others, what am I doing for myself? But the problem with being a Jew is you have a different kind of neshama. And it's good news and it's bad news. It's good news because if you listen to that neshama, you grow and you accomplish and you reach stellar heights. The problem, though, of course, is that if you ignore it, there's an inner unrest. And there's an inner unrest that you have to meet. Now, sometimes Jews run off the deep end and they meet that voice with all kinds of answers. And Jews are at the head of every ism in the world. Because if a Jew isn't religious and he's not leading a life of meaning and purpose as his Creator intended him to, he'll need to fulfill that voice and he'll become the head of socialism or communism or whatever ism is in that day, because he needs to change the world. He needs to change himself. He needs to grow. He needs to do something of meaning and substance, because there's that voice inside that says, what are you doing? But the point is, even that will not give a person rest, because at the end of the day, I know it's false. I know it's empty. So the very first thing that a person needs if they wish to be happy is they have to know why they were here. They have to be headed in a path of growth, of changing. You don't have to be a great tzaddik, because I don't know if you or I are holding there now, but you have to be headed upward, you have to know why you're here, and you have to be growing. And that's the first criteria. Number one, you have to be living a life of meaning, of purpose, growing. But there's a second layer and a second necessary ingredient if you want to be happy. And that is you have to know that Hashem runs the world. And let me explain to you what I mean. The Aruch HaSadikim explains that a person is happy if he has all of his needs met. If I have everything that I need, I have it all, I'll be happy because I have all of my needs met, nothing bad befalls me, only good things, and I have everything that I need, of course, I'll be happy. Well, here's the problem. Being happy means I have all my needs met. Well, what if I need things and I don't have them? So for instance, I need more money, or I need more honor, or I need more friends, or I need more attention, or I need more recognition. And if you are needy, you cannot be happy. You see, if I'm lacking, if I don't have, then how could I be happy? I need something and I don't have it. I don't have enough money. I need more money. I'm in real serious need. I need more attention. I need more honor. That person got my position. He has my position. It was stolen from me. And unless I fundamentally understand that Hashem runs the world, unless I fundamentally understand that Hashem takes care of my needs, my job is to use the world in the ways of the world, but Hashem provides for my parnasa, for my health, for everything that I need. And exactly the life setting that I was supposed to get, I was given. Unless I understand that, I will be needy, I will be hungry, I'll be deprived of what I need. And of course I can't be happy, because if I'm lacking, if I'm needy, if I'm deprived, who can be happy? But it's very interesting because Rashi explains to us that there's an ani and an evyon, and they're different. An ani is a poor man. A poor man doesn't have enough. Now he could have a house, he could have a car, he could have clothing, but he doesn't have enough money. He can't pay his mortgage, can't pay his car payment. He could have assets, but he needs. That's an ani. But an evyon is something else. An evyon is a person who's destitute. He has nothing. No house, no cars, no clothing, completely bereft. There are many wealthy people who are evyonim, totally empty. I have to have more. And unless you train yourself to know that Hashem created the world and runs the world, unless you train yourself to trust in your Creator, you can easily be an evyon, because I need, and my needs aren't met. I need to be handsome. I need to be popular. I need to be very well respected. My needs are not met. And once you allow a little bit of competition and just a little bit of jealousy to enter into your personality, and before you know it, you will be constantly in a state of needing, never ever possibly being able to meet those needs, and you'll be an evyon. And of course, the concept of you being happy is well outside the realm of the possible. So the very first thing you need to be happy is an understanding of what we're doing here, what life's about, so you're growing, you're accomplishing, so there's an inner peace. The second thing you need is to know that Hashem runs the world, and it's something that requires working on. It's something that requires thinking about, something that requires focusing on. It requires dwelling into the essence of me, talking to myself often, and saying to myself, don't you get it? Hashem runs the world, Hashem controls the world, and Hashem gives me everything that I need. And as the Orchas Tzaddikim explains, once I understand that kol hatzlachaso, all of my success in this world and the world to come, is completely in the hands of Hashem, and no one else can affect me in any way, immediately there's a sense of calm, a sense of trust, a sense of loving Hashem, but more than anything, there's a sense of peace. I'm not pursuing things that I can't possibly acquire. I'm not pursuing more and more. There's a sense of peace, and with that comes a sense of happiness. And these two requirements are basic before we even begin the discussion. A person has to have a very, very clear understanding of why we're here. Life has to have meaning, and I have to have my needs met. That doesn't mean I'm going to have everything that I need, but I have an understanding that Hashem runs the world, Hashem takes care of me, and I'm okay. But there's a third layer. Even if I have the first two in place, there's a third layer that's also needed, and unfortunately, if you don't have the third layer in place, I'm afraid to say often you will not be happy. In fact, often you might find yourself miserable. You see, the reality is that life brings an awful lot of lemons. Life is beautiful, and Hashem is very kindly and merciful, but at the end of the day, Hashem created the world for a particular purpose. This is the gym. And in the gym, there are a lot of obstacles. There are a lot of mountains you have to climb, a lot of things that you have to get past. and there's often a lot of pain. And I don't care who you are, and I don't care how great your life is, you're going to have issues and troubles and problems and real problems. You may have a real problem making a living. And I don't mean needing much more money. I mean needing enough money to pay the bills. You may have very, very real problems with your children, despite you doing the best job you could raising them. You might have difficulty with your spouse, despite you're really working on your marriage. You might have trouble with your in-laws. You might have trouble with your health. And it wasn't your choice. You didn't wake up in the morning and say, Hashem, I would love migraines. Oh, that'd be great. Give me a migraine where I can't do anything but think about getting away from this throbbing pain in my head. Hashem, I would love diabetes. Yeah, that'd be great. To have to always worry about my sugar and insulin, that'd be wonderful. You didn't get to choose those. But they will befall you. And everyone has typically a few, if not one. But the bottom line is headaches and worries and troubles and then it's going to be stuff that happens, whether it's you lose a job or you can't find a house or you can't find a spouse or you can't have kids or whatever the problem is. We all have them, and it's just a part of life, but not by accident. And not because Hashem's not good enough at running the world, but quite the opposite. Carefully orchestrated, carefully brought to challenge you to grow. And if you pay attention, you'll quickly note that just as soon as everything is really coming together, suddenly, boom, at a left field, I never expected this. I never expected that. And it's just when everything is really kind of gelling and coming together, and suddenly a whole new scene happens. And it's almost like, those video games where when you master one level, a new level comes up and you're fighting a whole new opponent who's stronger or faster or quicker. And if you beat that opponent and someone else comes out with a new skill, it almost looks like life is like that. Well, don't think that it looks that way. That is what life is. But it's not by accident. Hashem designs situations constantly for our benefit, constantly for our good. And they're not always the most fun, but growth-oriented, focused on allowing me to rise to the challenge, to transcend. But again, not always as much fun as we wish they would be. And because these things do happen, and they happen regularly, a person has to know how to deal with them. And a person has to know what attitude he should have, what my approach should be, how do I fully embrace it, and more than anything, how am I happy when these things happen? And while just knowing that my Creator is bringing them is very reassuring, I think there's a specific method of really dealing with this that will help us to a much greater extent. And to understand that, I'm going to call the third layer, let's focus on something interesting. Yirmiyah Navi says to Hashem, Madua derech rashayim tzalecha. Why is it that the wicked succeed? But Yirmiyah was a Navi, and he was a very, very deep philosopher. And his question wasn't a shallow question. He was asking a pointed, specific question. Hashem, why is it that you allowed Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the Beis HaMikdash? Why Hashem allowed the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed? Yirmiyah did not have a question. He knew very well. And he knew that was slated. He was a Navi who for almost 40 years warned the Jewish nation that it's going to happen. It was no secret. But the question that he had is, why Nebuchadnezzar? What made him so unique, so special that he was allowed that honor? And as the Gemara explains to us, Hashem only allows his nation to fall to the mighty powers. And as a matter of fact, one of the advices that the wicked say one to another is attack the Jews because you'll be Larosh, you'll be ahead, you'll be on top, because Hashem will never allow his nation to fall to a lowly people, that people will rise to the top before they attack. Yirmiyah's question is, what made Nebuchadnezzar so unique that he got to be the one to destroy the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that Hashem answered Yirmiyah. And Hashem says to Yirmiyah, you have a question? You have a question why I rewarded that wicked man for the 4 steps that he ran? If you have a question about why I rewarded him for the 4 steps that he ran for my honor, can you imagine the question that you're going to have when you see the reward waiting for Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? And then the Gemara explains to us what this means. The Gemara explains to us that Nebuchadnezzar was not initially the king of Bavel. Merudach was the king of Bavel, and Nebuchadnezzar was a court scribe, maybe an advisor, but he was merely just that, a scribe. In any case, Chizkiyahu was the Melech Yehuda at the time. Chizkiyahu was a brilliant Eved Hashem, and Chizkiyahu was a truly righteous and great individual. And Chizkiyahu had Ruach HaKodesh, and he saw Baruch HaKodesh that he was going to have children who would be wicked. He was going to have children who were so wicked that they would lead the Jewish nation far, far off course. And he decided, therefore, not to have children. And Hashem was not pleased with this. And Chizkiyahu took ill. And in fact, it became very clear that shortly he was going to die. He was on his deathbed. And Yirmiyah comes to Chizkiyahu and says, will you do tshuva now? And Chizkiyahu says, tshuva for what? What have I done wrong? You know I'm a tzaddik. And Yirmiyah says, why aren't you married? Why don't you have children? Why don't you have children? I already explained to you. I saw prophetically that my children will be wicked. Why should I bring children into the world who will not just rebel against Hashem, but are going to bring the Jewish nation to terrible, terrible tragedies? I can't do that. And Yirmiyah says, in that case, prepare to die. What do you mean, says Chizkiyahu? How could I do this? These are Hashem's secret. This is Hashem's world. He runs the world. And your job is to serve your Creator. Let Hashem worry about the future. Let Hashem worry about the world. And Chizkiyahu realized that not only was he wrong, but he would die if he didn't do tshuva. At which point Chizkiyahu says to Yirmiyah, maybe between my merits and your merits, we can change it around. And in fact, they made a shidduch. Yirmiyah's daughter married Chizkiyahu, and they had two children who were ultimate Rishoyim, one of whom was Menashe, who was king of Israel for 55 years and led the Jewish nation to horrible, horrible things. But in any case, no sooner did Chizkiyahu decide that he was going to have children than he suddenly, miraculously became well. And it was a very clear, overt miracle to the extent that the world knew about it. The world knew that Chizkiyahu, the king, was on his deathbed, and suddenly he was well. When Merudach, who was the king of Bavel, heard this, he said, oh my, this is a miracle. And he was so moved that he decided he must send a letter and a present to King Chizkiyahu. And he wrote a letter. And in the letter he wrote, Shalom l'malka Chizkiyahu, peace to you, Melech Chizkiyahu. Shalom l'karat Yerushalayim, peace to the city of Yerushalayim. Shalom le'eloka Rabbah, peace to the great God. And he wrote this letter, gave a present, and gave it to his courier to go bring it to Chizkiyahu in Eretz Yisrael. In any case, his scribe, his advisor, Nebuchadnezzar, wasn't there at this time. He was involved in something else. And he came to the palace. He heard about a letter, and he asked Merudach what was the letter, what were the contents. Merudach explained to him, and Nebuchadnezzar said, wait, tell me again, what did you write? Merudach said, I wrote to the great King Chizkiyahu, to the great king, to the great city of Yerushalayim, to the great God. Nebuchadnezzar said, wait a minute. If you recognize this act as a miracle, then obviously it's God's world, and God was the one who brought this miracle. The order should be reversed. It shouldn't be to the great king Chizkiyahu, to the great city of Yerushalayim, to God. God should be first. You should write to the great God, Hashem, to the city of Yerushalayim. Chizkiyahu is the least important. He's only the mortal flesh and blood. At which point Merudach said, you're right. The one who interpreted should be the one who fulfills it. You go catch the courier, tell him to stop, go write the letter your way. So in fact, Nebuchadnezzar runs after the courier. After 4 steps, Gavriel HaMalach stops him. Says Rabbi Yochanan, if it weren't for the fact that Gavriel HaMalach stopped him, he would have been able to destroy the entire Jewish nation. You see, he ran 4 steps in the honor of Hashem. He said the order's wrong, it should be Hashem first. And because of those 4 steps that he ran, he was rewarded, and he was allowed to destroy Yerushalayim. Had Gavriel HaMalach not stopped him, who knows what would have been. Now, if you think about this Gemara, I think you should ask a very obvious question on the Gemara. And that is, number one, what is the great covet to Hashem that Nebuchadnezzar was engaged in? He wasn't a religious person. He didn't necessarily even respect Hashem. He said to Merudach, you, sir, are inconsistent in your thinking. If you recognize this as a miracle, the one who brought the miracle is God, so God should come first. It wasn't even that he wanted to treat Hashem with honor. It wasn't that he wanted the world to know the greatness of Hashem. His point was that you are inconsistent. But more than anything, he wasn't really in charge. Merudach then told him, okay, it was your idea, you go fulfill it. So upon the king's command, he had to go fulfill it. But the honor that was given to Hashem really was not exactly by Nebuchadnezzar, and it wasn't really for the purpose of honoring Hashem, and it wasn't anything more than like catching an inconsistency in the king's logic, and all of a sudden he's so rewarded that he gets to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. And this Gemara is very, very difficult to understand. If Nebuchadnezzar gave his life to honor Hashem because he truly respected Hashem, we could discuss what he should be rewarded with. But that wasn't at all the case. It was more than anything just a flighty, sort of fleeting kind of thought. Why was he given such honor? This Gemara begs understanding. And to understand that, I think we need to sort of take a little different perspective. And let me explain a little bit of what I mean. Ronald Reagan, when he was growing up, was a very, very successful person. He was very intelligent, very well coordinated, handsome. But there was one thing that didn't fit into the picture. He was a terrible, terrible athlete. And it really didn't make a lot of sense because he really was well coordinated and he really loved to play ball, but he was the last kid picked on his team. And every time he would be in the field to catch a pop-up or any kind of ball that would be hit, he'd miss it, he'd drop it. He describes one time he was 13 or 14 years old and an easy pop-up was up in the air, and when the bat hit the ball and it went up, he heard every one of his teammates groan because it was headed right towards him. He stood under it with his glove ready, and boom, it smashed him in the head. He missed the ball altogether and ended up losing the game. And Ronald Reagan describes that sometime that year, again, he was about 13 or 14 years of age, he was in a car, riding in the back seat, and he looked out on the side of the road, and he said to himself, oh my goodness, that blur, it's not a green blur, those are trees. And wait, that thing, it's a billboard. And only at that moment did he realize that he was very, very nearsighted. They didn't test for vision in young grades in those days, and he was unaware of the fact that he was extremely nearsighted. No one tested him, he didn't know. But at that moment, that aha moment, he realized what his problem up until then was. And I think every once in a while in life we get one of those aha moments when we get to then, from this new perspective, look back on everything and suddenly, whoa, it makes a whole lot of sense. But not just a whole lot of sense, all of a sudden our entire perspective is vastly different and looked at with totally different eyes. May 1945, and really it wasn't until August 6, 1945, the world's understanding changed. You see, it was one atom bomb, and not even a large bomb. It weighed 800 pounds, but an entire city, Nagasaki, Japan, was leveled. The entire city was devastated. 100,000 people died at the point of the impact. 100,000 more died later on. And the world discovered a whole new form of power. The world discovered atomic energy. But I want you to understand what the world discovered was a whole new dimension of reality. There's a book written called Hiroshima that describes what it was like. You see, the epicenter, the actual center of the blast, it's not just the power, not just the explosiveness, the heat rises to about 3 million degrees Fahrenheit. And you describe human beings vaporizing, meaning to say most of the human body is water. And they describe a wall where a moment earlier a man had been standing, but after the blast, all you saw was the outline of a man because his entire body had vaporized, and all that was left was as if you painted sort of an image of a man there because everything was gone. And the energy that was released, the power that was shown to the world was astonishing. 2 days later, Nagasaki. And after these two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were destroyed, the world entered the nuclear age, at least the age of atomic energy, and the world understood things from a different perspective. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was measured by thousands of tons of TNT. And the measurement was 20,000 tons of TNT. Meaning to say, when that bomb exploded, it had the explosive energy, the explosive power, as if you had 20,000 tons of TNT going off in one moment. And again, it changed the world's understanding. But since that time, life has changed a little bit. And we've gone from the age of the atomic bomb to the hydrogen bomb to all types of new inventions. And now no longer are these type of weapons measured by kilotons, by thousands of pounds. They're now measured by megatons, by millions of tons of energy. Meaning to say, if you took that bomb which destroyed an entire city and it had 20,000 tons of TNT explosive power, well, what we're dealing with now is 1,000 times the energy level. Meaning the nuclear weapons that have been developed in the 80s and the 90s are so much more powerful that we're talking a total different magnitude of order. And we're talking about explosive power that can destroy a city as large as New York City in a heartbeat. And one of the largest bombs ever exploded measured 50 megatons, and it's a hard number to understand, but it means 50 million tons of TNT exploding at one point. And when it was exploded, the plane that dropped it, which was flying miles above, almost instantly the heat began rising. The mushroom cloud almost reached to the plane itself, but you could feel the waves of shaking 1,000 kilometers away. In fact, it caused a seismographic change in the earth on the Richter scale of 5.5, comparable to an earthquake, because the earth itself was shooken up. And when you're dealing with power of that magnitude, it's hard to even envision it. They say that that one bomb had the equivalent power of all the explosives exploded in the entire World War II multiplied by 10. And that's one bomb. And what mankind now understands is that there's a whole other order of magnitude. There's a whole other dimension of things that is well beyond conventional weaponry. Because I don't care how much TNT you pack into a plane and drop. I don't care how much explosives you load into the back of a truck. You cannot create a crater that's a mile wide. But once you're dealing with nuclear energy, you're in a whole different dimension. You're in a whole different world. And I believe that this mushal is very, very important. We live in a physical world. And the physical world that we live in is very slow, very sluggish, and we tend to rate and measure things within the context of our world. And it's true. How much can one human being accomplish in our slow physical world? Hey, he works faster, she works slower. He could accomplish what 10 men can do. That's very impressive. But at the end of the day, it's all in a very slow, sluggish form. And the reason why it's difficult for us to relate to the world to come, and the reason why it's difficult for us to relate to reward in the world to come, is because we think in very, very concrete terms. And I think what this Gemara is sharing with us is one of those aha moments. Nebuchadnezzar did something that was for him just a flippant, casual thing. He pointed out to the king of Babel, "Sir, your logic is inconsistent." But because of that, he was sent to run for the honor of Hashem, and those 4 steps he deserved reward for. But Hashem doesn't want to reward wicked people in the world to come. Hashem gives all of their reward in this world so that they can be finished and they don't have to be there. But if you want to know the appropriate reward for a flippant, casual remark that ended up with a little bit more honor to Hashem, not a lot, but a little bit more honor to Hashem, the answer is, look at this man. He was given the ultimate honor of a wicked man to destroy the base of Mikdash, to be the most powerful king in existence to do that which no mortal could ever do. But that's the honor that's appropriate, because at the end of the day, he ran 4 steps to the honor of Hashem. And on that Gemara, Rashi says, and every man should read this and understand the amount of reward that's awaiting him for what he does is incomparable and ununderstandable. And this simple reality that what we do is powerful, that our actions are huge, and that which we consider not a big deal, I put on tefillin, I wore tzitzit, I gave tzedakah, I did a nice, are huge, huge things that, again, in our physical world don't seem to be very meaningful, but accomplish worlds in the spiritual world that are waiting for us as reward in the world to come. And I think that this perspective, is critical to understand life via, and to understand how significant our actions are. And if this is the reward that's coming to a Russia who did something without really intending it, how much more so we who struggle and fight, whether it be directly for the honor of Hashem or doing things because Hashem wants us to, and we keep mitzvahs and we learn and we daven and we do, and it's often not easy. And the amount of reward that's awaiting for us is unimaginable. And I also believe that this is very helpful for dealing with situations in life. And let me give you a mashal to what I mean, and then I'll explain. Imagine it's the 1970s. And imagine that your grandfather calls the 10 of you, your 10 grandchildren, into the room. Now, you know your grandfather lived through the Holocaust. He was a simple man. He was a tailor. He never made much money, certainly not. But he says to you, my grandchildren, I've worked hard after the war. I was never granted much, but I wanted to leave for each of you something. And I davened, and I've left for each of you. I may have asked him, when I leave this earth, you'll see there's a great thing waiting for each of you. He wasn't a man of many words and didn't say much, but he did last many more years. And 35 years later, he passes away. And again, the 10 of you, the 10 grandchildren, are now called into the lawyer's office. And the lawyer explains to you, as you know, your grandfather set up a trust for you 35 years ago. And he asked that before the trust be distributed, that this letter be read. And the lawyer opens the letter, and the letter reads, my dear grandchildren, you know that I suffered, and you know that I loved you more than anything in existence. But unfortunately, I had very little. After all of my years of working, I had $16,500. That was all of my earthly possessions. And there were 10 of you. But I desperately craved to leave you something, to give something. So I davened and I davened and I davened. And one night in a dream, a malach comes to me and says, Hashem is pleased. Hashem is happy you suffered. And Hashem told me to tell you, your requests will be answered. This is what you ought to do. Tomorrow you ought to buy stock in Walmart for each of your grandchildren and put it away in a trust for them. It will be good. I said to the malach, "Was ist Walmart? Was ist Walmart?" The malach said, "Don't worry. Go to a stockbroker. Tell him you want to buy shares, 100 shares for each of your grandchildren, and it will be good." The letter goes on. I didn't know what Walmart was. I didn't know what a broker of stock was. I went to a broker of stock. I bought for each of you 100 shares of Walmart, and this is your Yerusha. At this point, you look to your cousins, your brother, your sister, and you say, Shkayach, my grandfather left me 100 share of Walmart. I mean, it's very nice. He's very kind. I appreciate the sentiment, but what's 100 share of Walmart worth? Until the lawyer explains to you that, of course, there have been quite a few stock splits since that time. And those 100 shares are now actually 205,000 shares. And that $1,650 investment back then of the 100 shares in Walmart is now worth $11,500,000, at which point you are very, very appreciative for your grandfather's kindness. And I believe that's a powerful mashal. Because the Orchos Tzaddikim explains how you're supposed to look at pain. It's like Hashem is taking copper coins from me, pennies, and He's going to reward me with gold bars. Yes, it hurts, but the pain is so transient, and it's so shallow. But the reward that it's awaiting for me for this is going to be so astonishing, to such a different magnitude of order, to such a different level, that it really isn't comparable. It's like buying a stock for $16.50 when you know that it's going to multiply and multiply and multiply. It's going to be worth millions of dollars. And the Orchos Tzaddikim explains that's how we're supposed to deal with tragedies, with traversities, with pains, with illnesses. I'm supposed to know that Hashem created and runs the world. And Hashem brings everything for the good. And my stomach ache and my headaches and my arm ache, and when I'm having trouble with Parnassah or my children or my in-laws or my wife or whatever it may be, I understand that Hashem brings this for my benefit. Maybe it's to teach me, maybe it's to atone, maybe it's just for me to transcend, to rise above, but every one of these things are going to bring me tremendous reward. Because I know that Hashem loves me more than any human being can ever feel love, and Hashem only wants my benefit, and everything that Hashem does is for the best. And with that understanding, I'm able to look at life differently. You see, the first thing I have to understand is the meaning and purpose in life. I'm growing, I'm here to accomplish. If I don't have that inner peace, there's no hope of my ever being happy. But after I have that, I also have to know that my needs are met, that Hashem runs the world, and Hashem gives me what I need. But this third level is a different perspective. It's when I'm in the moment, when I'm in pain, when I'm suffering, I have to recognize that this is for the best. But not just for the best as an drat, I got to go through it, and quite the opposite. My wife once described labor to me. I've never been in labor, but I know Chazal tell us that it's a extraordinarily dangerous time period. And women describe it as the most painful experience ever imaginable. And when my wife said to me that it's true, it's extraordinarily painful, it's also beautiful. Because it's so productive and it's bringing a baby into the world. And I want to share with you a very, very important understanding. If you exercise, you might know this. But there are many, many times when I'm training, let's say it's running, and I say to myself, oh my goodness, if it weren't for the fact that I'm so focused on this goal, this would probably be extraordinarily painful. My lungs are burning, my legs are aching, but it's not painful, it's beautiful. Let's go. I want it. I want more. I just hope I can endure it because I have a goal. I'm heading somewhere. And if you really train, you know that there's a very thin line between pain and pleasure. Any other activity, I would call this torture. But because there's a goal and because I'm headed somewhere, it's beautiful. And I have to tell you, there are many times when I exercise, and there are many times if I'm lifting weights or it's a really extreme exercise, when I would say to myself, there's no question in the world, if I had to endure this for any other purpose, I would call it Gehenna. But it's not painful. It's actually enjoyable. Now, I'm not a masochist. I don't enjoy pain, but that's the point. It's not painful. It's one thing to understand that this is for my betterment, but then it's still painful. The next level is when it's so beautiful, so meaningful, so purposeful, that let's go, bring it on. The activity itself becomes something that you enjoy. Now, whether we can get to that level for our headaches and problems and issues is another point, but ultimately that is the perspective. To understand that everything that Hashem brings is for the best, everything that Hashem brings me is for my good, and I'll be paid back in spades, to the extent that it's like taking copper coins and I'm going to be paid back for each of them with a gold bar. Let's go, trade them all, take it all, it doesn't matter, more headaches, more, let's go. And I believe that this is the third layer that a person needs. The first thing a person has to have if they want to be happy is they have to understand life. And no matter what you're doing, if you're not growing, if you're not accomplishing, if you're not changing, you're going to be empty and you're going to have a difficult time being happy. Number two, you have to have a sense of my needs are met. And Hashem takes care of me. But number three, you have to fundamentally understand life. When you do that, and you work on this, there's an inner joy, an inner peace. There are times in the calendar when we're especially focused on joy. There are times in the calendar where we're especially focused on the opposite. But the climate of my existence is happiness. I've heard it from my Rebbe, Yeshiva Zatzal, that you could learn Musar on Shabbos, and even though in yeshiva days and even now, learning Musar is oftentimes with tears. And I remember Musar Seder in yeshiva, the guys would be openly wailing, crying, it's Tisha box. How are you allowed to do it on Shabbos? You're not allowed to dover, somebody calls it tsar. You're not allowed to express on Shabbos. It's a pain that brings a person joy. And it's a kind of pain that's growing. And Tisha B'Av, when you're sitting on the floor crying, and I mean really crying, yes, you're crying, but it's not a despondency. It's not a depressing crying. There's an inner joy because I'm connecting to Hashem. I'm connecting to my people. I understand what I'm doing. I'm growing via it. And surely in times of joy, on his deathbed, the Gra, it said, kissed its goodbye. And he said these words, look at this. In this world, just by putting this on, I gain a mitzvah. What am I going to have in the world to come? I won't have that. Because in that moment of clarity, the Gra saw with absolute clarity the accomplishment of an act. A simple act of having tzitzits. They were on his body anyway. He didn't have to do anything. They were there, but just wearing it as a mitzvah. If I understood this, every action brings me close to Hashem, changes the upper world, changes this world. I grow through it. There'd be an inner joy and inner happiness. A person has to focus on it. A person has to understand it. And more than anything, they have to understand that Hashem runs the world, brings me to situations for my benefit. And when I do that, I recognize the beauty, the meaning, and even the painful moments in life are meaningful, significant, and oftentimes even beautiful.